20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Chapter 11, The Nautilus. Captain Nemo got up and I followed him. A double door in the back of the dining room opened, and we entered another room the same size as the one we had just left. It was a library. A large collection of uniformly bound books was set in high bookcases of black Brazilian rosewood inlaid with brass. They followed the shape of the room, and at their base were huge couches covered in brown leather and curved so as to give greater comfort. In front of them stood small movable desks on which one could rest the book one was reading, and which could be drawn up or pushed away at will. In the middle of the room there was a huge table covered with pamphlets and a few old newspapers. This whole ensemble was bathed in electric light coming from 4 frosted glass globes in the ceiling. I stood in wonder before this room so ingeniously fitted out, and I could not believe my eyes. "Captain Nemo," I said to my host, who had just stretched out on a divan, "this library would do honor to more than one palace on land, and I really am astounded to think that it travels with you into the ocean depths." "Where could one find greater solitude or silence, Professor?" replied Captain Nemo. "Can you boast of greater tranquility in your office in the museum?" "No, monsieur, and I must admit that it is very shabby alongside yours. Why, you have 6,000 or 7,000 books." 12,000, Monsieur Aronnax. These are my only ties with life on dry land, a life which ended for me the day my Nautilus first dove beneath the surface of the ocean. That day I bought my last books, pamphlets, and newspapers, and since then I have preferred to think that humanity has neither thought nor written anything. Moreover, Professor, you may feel free to use these books whenever you wish." I thanked Captain Nemo and went over to the bookshelves. There were all sorts of works on science, morality, and literature written in every known language, but I did not see a single book on political economy. It seemed as if such works were completely forbidden on board. There was, however, one odd thing about the library. All the books were arranged without thought for the language in which they were written, and this mixture proved that the captain of the Nautilus could read effortlessly whatever book came to hand. Among them I noticed all the masterpieces of ancient and modern writers, that is to say, the most beautiful works man has produced. Poetry, history, fiction, and science, from Homer to Hugo to George Sand. There are a lot of names listed there that I cannot pronounce, and I'm not going to try. But this library leaned heavily towards science. Books on mechanics, ballistics, hydrography, meteorology, geography, geology, etc., took up no less space than works on natural history, and I understood that all this formed the captain's principal source of study. I saw there all the works of Arago and Humboldt and a lot more people. The memoirs of the Academy of Science, the bulletins of various geographical societies, etc., and in a conspicuous place the 2 volumes which had perhaps won me this relatively warm reception on the part of Captain Nemo. Among the works of Joseph Bertrand, his book called The Founders of Astronomy furnished me with a date. Since I knew that it had appeared during the year 1865, I could conclude that the Nautilus could not have been launched before that date. Thus it was no more than 3 years at the most since Captain Nemo had begun his underwater existence. I hoped that more recent works would allow me to arrive at a more exact date, but I had plenty of time to undertake this project later, and I did not want to further delay our tour through the wonders of the Nautilus. "Monsieur," I said, "I would like to thank you for allowing me to use this library. It contains many scientific treasures that will be very useful to me." "This room is not only a library," said Captain Nemo, "but also a smoking room." "A smoking room?" I cried. "Do you smoke on board?" "Certainly." "I am therefore forced to believe, monsieur, that you still maintain relations with Havana?" "Not at all," answered the captain. "Try this cigar, Monsieur Aronnax, and even though it doesn't come from Havana, you will appreciate it if you are a connoisseur." I took the cigar he offered me. In form, it resembled those from Cuba, but it seemed to be made of gold leaf. I lit it with a little brazier, set in an elegant bronze stand, and I took my first puffs with all the delight of a habitual smoker who has not had a cigar in 2 days. "It's excellent," I said, "but it isn't made of tobacco." "No," replied the captain. "This tobacco comes neither from Havana nor the Orient. It is made from a kind of seaweed rich in nicotine, which I get from the sea." "Not without some difficulty. Do you still miss your Havana cigars, monsieur?" "Captain, from now on, I wouldn't even look at one." "Then please feel free to take one whenever you want, and without worrying about where they come from. Even though there's no label to guarantee their quality, they're still not bad. On the contrary. Just then, Captain Nemo opened another door, opposite the one through which we had entered, and I was led into a huge, splendidly lit room. It had 4 walls with the corners cut off at angles. It was 33 feet long, 20 feet wide, and 16 feet high. A luminous ceiling decorated with small arabesques gave off a soft, clear light on the wonders brought together in this museum. For it was a veritable museum in which an intelligent, prodigal hand had brought together all the treasures of nature and art and placed them about in a slightly helter-skelter fashion, giving somewhat the impression of an artist's studio. 30 or so paintings by famous masters, uniformly framed and separated by trophies, decorated the walls, hung with tapestries of severe design. There I saw works of the greatest value, and which for the most part I had already admired in private European collections or art exhibits. The various schools of the earlier masters were represented by a Madonna of Raphael, a Virgin of Leonardo da Vinci, a Nymph by Correggio, a Woman by Titian, an Adoration by the Magi by Veronese, an Assumption by Murillo, a Portrait by Holbein, a Monk by Velázquez, a Martyr by Ribera, a Village Fair by Rubens, 2 Flemish landscapes by Teniers, 3 little genre paintings by Gerard Dow, Metsu, and Paul Potter, 2 works by Géricault and Proudhon, several seascapes by Poussin and Vernet. Among the works of modern painters there were pictures signed by Delacroix, Ingres, Decamps, Troyen, Meissonier, de Bogny, etc., and small models of marble and bronze statues copied from the loveliest works of antiquity stood on pedestals in the corners of this magnificent museum. That state of stupefaction which the commander of the Nautilus had predicted was beginning to take hold of my mind. "Professor," this strange man then said, "I hope you will excuse the informal way I have received you and also the disorder reigning in this room." "Monsieur," I replied, "without trying to find out who you are, I hope you will permit me to recognize you as an artist." "Merely an amateur, monsieur, nothing more. I used to enjoy collecting beautiful works created by the hand of men. I used to search and hunt for them avidly, and I have been able to collect some objects of great value. These are my last memories of life on earth, which is dead as far as I am concerned. In my eyes, your modern artists are already ancient, with 2,000 or 3,000 years of existence, and I confuse them all in my mind. Great artists are ageless." "And musicians," I said, pointing to the different scores he had in the room, and many, many more, all spread out on the large organ against one of the walls of the room. "These musicians," answered Captain Nemo, "are all the contemporaries of Orpheus, for differences in time disappear in dead men's memories. And I am dead, Professor, as dead as whatever friends of yours lie 6 feet under." Captain Nemo stopped talking and seemed lost in a deep reverie. I contemplated him with great interest and silently analyzed the strange expression on his face. He was leaning on the corner of a precious inlaid table. He no longer saw me. He forgot I was in the room. Not wanting to disturb him in his withdrawal, I continued looking over the objects collected in this room. Next to works of art, rarities of nature held an important place. They consisted mainly of plants, shells, and other products of the ocean, all of which had undoubtedly been personally collected by Captain Nemo. In the middle of the room, an electrically illuminated jet of water fell back into a bowl made from a single giant clam. This shell, furnished by the largest of acephalous mollusks, measured about 20 feet around its delicately scalloped rim. It was even larger than those lovely giant clams given to Francis I by the Republic of Venice, and which the Church of St. Sulpice in Paris has made into 2 huge holy water basins. Around this fountain, beneath elegant glass cases framed in brass, the most precious products of the sea ever beheld by a naturalist were carefully arranged and labeled. One can imagine my delight. The subkingdom of the zoophytes was represented by various curious specimens of its 2 divisions of polyps and echinoderms. From the first division there were organ pipe corals, sea fans, soft Syrian sponges, Isidae from the Moluccas, sea pens, marvelous Virgularia from the Norwegian waters, various Umbella, Alcyonaria, a whole series of madrepores, which my teacher Milne Edwards so wisely classed in sections, and among which I noticed Flabella, Aculinae from Reunion Island, a Neptune's chariot from the West Indies, some superb types of corals, and all known species of those strange polyparies which gather together to form an entire coral island which someday will become continents. Among the echinoderms, notable for their spiny covering, there were starfish, Pentratrini, feather stars, asterophons, sea urchins, sea cucumbers, etc., thus forming a complete collection of this division. A rather high-strung specialist in seashells would certainly have fainted before other and even more numerous glass cases in which specimens of mollusks were displayed. I saw there a collection of inestimable value, and which lack of time will not permit me to describe in its entirety. Among other things, I will only mention as a reminder the royal hammershell of the Indian Ocean, whose even white spot stood out clearly against a red and brown background, a brightly colored imperial spondylus covered with spines, and only rarely found in European museums. I guessed it to be worth $4,000. A common hammershell from Australian waters, which is very difficult to obtain. Exotic cockles from the Senegal, with their fragile white shells and double valves, which a breath could shatter like a soap bubble. Several varieties of watering pot shells from Java, looking like limestone tubes edged with leaf-like pleats and very highly prized by collectors. A whole series of top shells, some colored greenish-yellow and fished around near the American continent, the others reddish-brown and found in Australian waters. The former, which had come from the Gulf of Mexico, had remarkable shells and overlapping layers. The latter, captured in southern waters, were more star-shaped, and in addition, and rarest of all, there was the magnificent spur shell of New Zealand, then remarkable sulphurized Telenae, a precious species of Venus shells, the trellised solarium for the coast of Tranquebar, the marbled turban shell with its gleaming mother of pearl, the green parrot shell from the China Sea, the almost unknown conical shell of the genus that I can't pronounce, all the varieties of cowries used as money in India and Africa, and the glory of the sea, the most precious shell of the East Indies. And in addition, Latorinae, Delphinulae, and a whole bunch of other ones that I can't pronounce. Spindle shells, wing shells, Tacoriae, limpets, and all sorts of delicate fragile shells which science has baptized with the most charming names. In separate special cases, there were incomparably beautiful strings of pearls which gleamed with fiery sparks beneath the electric light. There were pink pearls taken from the Penae of the Red Sea, green pearls from the Haliotis iris, yellow, blue, and black pearls, strange products of various mollusks from the world's oceans, and lastly, several specimens of incalculable value produced by the rarest of pearl oysters. Some of these pearls were larger than a pigeon's egg. They were as valuable, if not more so, as those the traveler Tavernier sold to the Shah of Persia for $600,000. And they seemed finer than that other pearl belonging to the Imam of Muscat, which I had believed unequaled in the whole world. It was therefore impossible to estimate the value of this collection. Captain Nemo must have spent millions acquiring those various specimens, and I wondered where he got the money to indulge his collector's whims to such a degree. Suddenly my thoughts were interrupted by the following words. "You've been examining my shells, Professor. I can see why they might interest a naturalist, but to me they have a greater charm, for I have gathered them all with my own hands, and there is no corner of the sea I have left unexplored." "I can easily understand, Captain, what a joy it must be to travel about amid such wealth. You are one of those rare men who have accumulated their treasure themselves. No museum in Europe has such a collection of marine products. But if I use up all my admiration for this, what will be left for the boat that carries it? I don't want to delve into your secrets, but I must admit that this Nautilus, the motor power it contains, the devices by which it is maneuvered, the powerful agent used to drive it, all this excites my curiosity to the highest degree. For instance, hanging over there on the wall, I see some instruments, and I haven't the vaguest idea what they're for. Could you tell me?" Monsieur Aronnax, Captain Nemo replied, I've already said that you are free on board, and consequently no part of the Nautilus will be closed to you. You can visit the entire ship, and I would consider it a pleasure to act as your guide. I don't know how to thank you, monsieur, but I would not like to abuse your kindness. I would merely like to know what these instruments... Professor, you will see these instruments in my room, and it is there that I will have the pleasure of explaining their purpose. But first, come and look at the cabin I have reserved for you. I want you to see how you will be accommodated on board the Nautilus. I followed Captain Nemo as he led me through a door in the corner of the room and into one of the ship's passageways. After a few steps, we turned into not a cabin, but an elegant room with a bed, dressing table, and various other pieces of furniture. I could only thank my host. Your room is next to mine, he said, opening a door, and my cabin gives onto the room we have just left. I entered the captain's cabin. It had a severe, almost monastic look about it. There was an iron cot, a work table, and several dressers, all somewhat dimly lit. No comforts, just the strict necessities. Captain Nemo pointed to a chair. Please sit down, he said. I sat down, and he began talking.